Well, if you are a sponsor of a Haiti child, you've been getting updates from our people and Hope for Haiti's Children. If you've been following the news, you'll probably aware of the situation in Haiti. I just obviously heavy on my mind is that I know it is on many of yours, and just a little bit of an update. As I understand it now, the schools that we operate in Haiti that are outside of Port-au-Prince are back in operation, and the children are being fed daily. Port-au-Prince itself is just shut down. It's just the people are. If you saw the letter from Hope for Haiti's Children recently, some 400 members of the Delmas congregation, which is there in the heart of Port-au-Prince, and where Jean Terrard was the preacher for so many years before he died. Those people are actually just in hiding. And our people who are part of the staff of Hope for Haiti's Children are working to try to get them necessities, food, just to keep them going during this period of the total collapse of everything in Port-au-Prince. I guess the head guy now, according to what I'm reading in the news, is this Jimmy Barbecue Cheriza, I think is the way they pronounce it, Cherize, French. He's kind of the top warlord, and he's kind of the head of a conglomerate of the gangs. And he's the one now that they're actually negotiating with to no effect. It seems so strange that governments would be negotiating with a warlord, but that seems to be the state of things in Haiti right now. There are a couple of stories about where the name barbecue came from. One has to do with Jimmy was a member of the Haitian police force until about 2018. He was kicked out because he was involved in several massacres. Multiple people killed, 70 people killed in one of the massacres while he was still on the police force. And they kicked him out on the grounds of that. But one of the stories is that he has a penchant for burning people alive, and that's the source of his nickname. Others have suggested that he has practiced cannibalism as a way of just terrorizing people to really frighten them. I don't know the facts, of course, but these are the things that are being reported in the news. And what I do know is it's a terrible, terrible situation in Port-au-Prince, and not a whole lot we can do. We can, Hope for Haiti's Children is accepting monetary donations to help our brethren try to support these church members in exile there in Port-au-Prince. Other than that, prayer seems to be our main avenue. Did anybody have any additional information about that they wanted to share, or any questions about that I might could help with? Terrible situation. All right, so we left off last week talking about the event of the Pharisees bringing the woman that they claimed was guilty of adultery, that had been caught in the act of adultery, and the way that Jesus responded to that. And we finished off with a little video that I thought was very good as far as explaining a lot of the nuances of that. But I wanted to just rather quickly review that and maybe make a few other comments and see if you had any comments, and then we'll move on. So from the 8th chapter of John, as he was speaking, the teachers of religious law and the Pharisees brought a woman who had been caught in the act of adultery. They put her in front of the crowd. Teacher, they said to Jesus, this woman was caught in the act of adultery. The law of Moses says to stone her. What do you say? They were trying to trap him into saying something they could use against him, but Jesus stooped down and wrote in the dust with his finger. They kept demanding an answer, so he stood up again and said, "All right, but let the one who has never sinned throw the first stone." Then he stooped down again and wrote in the sand, in the dust. When the accusers heard this, they slipped away one by one, beginning with the oldest, until only Jesus was left in the midst of the crowd with the women. Then Jesus stood up again and said to the woman, "Where are your accusers? Didn't even one of them condemn you?" "No, Lord," she said. And Jesus said, "Neither do I. Go and sin no more." Well, there's so many things wrong with this. Obviously, John recognizes right up front that this is not a legitimate complaint about Kerry. Had his hand up. Right over here, David. Right here next. We got more than one. There we go. This was not a legitimate concern. This was an attempt to entrap. Go ahead, Kerry.
Well, the earliest versions of John don't actually include the story.
Say that again.
The earliest versions of John don't actually include the story. It was added later.
Oh, I didn't know that. I had not heard that. Isn't that interesting? Some of the early manuscripts did not include this event. That's interesting to know. So, some thoughts about this. Deuteronomy 19:15, among other places, under the law of Moses, said that anyone being charged would have to be presented by 2 or 3 witnesses before the conviction would have any validity. In the story, the way that we have it in John's recording, we don't know who charged her. Who were the witnesses? They didn't step forward. This was just a crowd of people coming saying, "We caught her." Who? No one actually stood up as a witness against her. Of course, the most blatant thing, the most obvious thing would be, where was the man? It's really hard to commit adultery without both people being involved. There was no mention of the man at all. That would have been enough to just overthrow any argument that they might have had right there. Deuteronomy 22 and 22 says both parties must be executed. You can't single out the man. You can't single out the woman. If there is a guilt of adultery under the law of Moses, then it's a 2-person conviction, and both must share equally in the judgment and in the execution. Already under the law of Moses, she should be released. There's no way that this can be prosecuted with her as a standalone. Deuteronomy 17:7 says that the witnesses must throw the first stones, then others join in. You saw this demonstrated, I thought, really well in the video last week, if you were here. Stoning was not a pretty thing. They would usually put them in a pit, maybe not always as deep as the one you saw in the video, but in a lower position in the ground, a ditch or something, and then they would use stones large enough and far enough away that they would be lethal. And the first stones had to be thrown by the witnesses. The 2 witnesses or 3 witnesses, how many ever there were the ones that had to cast the first lethal stones. When Jesus said, "Let him without sin," and I can't read this in our English translation, but I've seen several authorities who say that in the Greek language, the way that this is presented, Jesus is not saying let the one who has no sin. He's saying the one who has the same sin. If you have never been guilty of this sin, of which you're accusing this woman, then you throw the first stone. Now, I don't know if that's true or not, but I know it's true that a lot of people believe that's the case, which makes it even more condemning. Because, we could all say, well, yeah, nobody is free from sin. But this seems to be more than just that. When Jesus said, neither do I condemn you, that was a gracious and generous thing that he said to the woman, but he had no basis on which to condemn her under the law of Moses. Now, we could say that he's God, and so he knows things that the accusers didn't know, so he could make that statement, I don't condemn you because there is fault in your life. But as a legal statement, he wasn't required to do that because she was not convicted. That makes sense? And when Jesus said, go and sin no more, he could say that to any one of us, right? And because none of us are without sin. And nothing in this event could be interpreted to diminish or override the law. Jesus did not ignore the law of Moses. He interpreted it correctly. There was nothing that was happening in front of him that required him to convict that woman of adultery. The prosecution completely failed. And we can't use this as a license to sin. It's not a picture of overlooking sin. It's a picture of grace, but not condoning. So anybody have anything else that they'd like to add or ask or comment about the woman that was brought to Jesus with the accusation of being caught in the very act of adultery? It really makes you question whether they even caught her. Why would not they have brought both? Maybe she was, but it's very questionable. David, I keep reaching for it, and David's got it.
I was thinking, as you were saying that in our history, we were basically taught to seek out and condemn sin in other people. That's a sin, and I'm going to call you out on it. And not that we should overlook it, but I'm thinking, it's not a license to sin. It might be an example of that's not really our job. We want people not to sin, and we want to stay away from sin in our lives, but it seems to be a push in our history that we just had to remove people or do something because they had sin in their lives, and we're not sinless ourselves.
Yeah, and John has something.
Take Adam and Eve for example, right? When they sinned, God was not happy, and the snake told Adam and Eve, "Eat the fruit from the other tree." Was God happy with Adam and Eve? No. They sinned over and over and over. And God said, leave my garden now, and you will never come back.
Yeah. Of course, in this particular case, the sin was not the issue, was it? And I think that we would do well to consider that when we begin to point fingers of accusation. Are we seeking to bring a sinner back into the fold, or is our motivation less righteous than that? Just a thought.
Well, there's some in our congregation, not our congregation, but in the Church of Christ, that one sin is greater than another, and they try to punish people because of trying to make a sin greater than any other.
Yeah, and we get to be the judge on which one's most important, right?
Right.
Yeah. Kathy has something.
To me, I think is really a good point that with Jesus, we don't know what he was scribbling, and we can all speculate. But he's, like you said, he knew if she was guilty or not. But the accusers, when he says, well, where are your accusers, where are they? To me, it was like, look, they're just as bad as you are.
Yeah, I think he made that
but go
very
and
apparent.
sin no more.
Yeah.
So where are those accusers? We
Yeah.
are so quick to accuse, but we are not much better or better than the one that was wrong.
Absolutely, yeah. And we don't have to be sinless to call out sin in somebody else's life if our reasons are pure. Don't mean to say that.
Lanny, I always we have no idea what he wrote in the sand, but I kind of always visualized it as like in Daniel 5, where the unseen hand writes on the wall, you have been weighed in the balance and found wanting.
Yeah. Yeah. Nebuchadnezzar. Mm-hmm. And we talked about it a little bit last week, but there's that picture, that metaphor of the finger of God writing the law of Moses, and now Jesus with the finger of God writing the law of Jesus. I don't know what he wrote, but there's just that Remiz, if you will, associated. All right, verse 12. Jesus spoke to the people once more and said, I am, there it is, the I am, and we'll talk about that more, the light of the world. If you follow me, you won't have to walk in darkness because you will have the light that leads to life. So here we have another one of the 7 great I ams of John's gospel. Light is so critical, so fundamental, so basic to our existence. Genesis 1, in the beginning, God said, let there be light. And John picks up on that. And John 1 says that God created everything through him, and nothing was created except through him. The Word gave life to everything that was created. His life brought what? Light to everyone. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness can never extinguish it. Goodness knows we've been trying to extinguish it ever since he came on the scene. And 2,000 years, and it shines brighter today than it ever has. Remembrance, the occasion that we're dealing with right now in Jesus' life is the Feast of the Tabernacles. And the Feast of the Tabernacles remembers the time that they spent in the wilderness going from Egypt to the land of Canaan. And what was it that guided them, that moved them, that gave them the awareness of the presence of God? Well, by day it was a pillar of cloud, and by night it was this pillar of fire, light for the journey. journey through the wilderness at the Festival of Tabernacles remembers and celebrates was defined by the pillar of cloud by day and the pillar of fire by night, guiding and protecting the Israelites. One of the central rituals during Sukkot, or the Festival of Tabernacles, involved lighting these large menorahs, the 9-stand menorahs in the temple in Jerusalem that illuminated the courtyard. And then at the end of the 7-day Festival of Lights, of the Festival of Tabernacles, then those would be extinguished and the people would go home in darkness. And Jesus shows himself as the light of the world that is not extinguished, that does not go out. The lighting ceremony during Sukkot was accompanied by music and dancing and festivals, fostering a sense of unity and joy among the people. And the light of Jesus serves as a symbol of celebration and communal happiness. At the end of the festival, the people began to return home without this ceremonial light. Some of the things that we equate with light as symbols, as metaphors, we see in light the idea of guidance and direction. If we're traveling at night, we turn on our flashlights so that we don't stumble, so we know where we're going. There's this physical light that illuminates darkness and helps people find their way. And Jesus is seen as providing spiritual guidance and direction in life. His teachings illuminate the path that you and I should follow. There is in light the idea of truth and understanding. In this metaphor, Jesus is depicted as bringing spiritual truth and enlightenment to humanity, helping people to understand God's will and purpose for our lives. And even more than that, showing the Father to us, revealing the Father to us. Salvation and redemption. Light is often associated with purity and goodness. Light is good, darkness is bad. Jesus brings salvation and redemption to humanity through his sacrificial death and resurrection. He is the means by which people can be saved from sin and from darkness, from despair. Hope and comfort. In times of darkness and despair, the metaphor of Jesus as the light of the world offers hope and comfort to believers. It reminds us that even in the darkest moments, the light of Christ can shine through, bringing healing and restoration. Well, it's time for a song. There are several songs we could think of with Jesus being the light of the world. And, there are scores and scores of genres of music. And all of us have our preferences. We have the top 2 or 3 that we enjoy, and the others that we tolerate, and the ones that we can't stand. And they're all different. We all have our different ones. I try to like most kinds of music. Opera in small bites. At the other end, I guess heavy metal, that not really at all for me, but other people like it, so there you go. But somewhere in the middle of all of that is the Southern gospel, which I do enjoy. And this is another older recording from the Gaither group. And they get a little demonstrative in singing it. So if you don't enjoy it, just tolerate it, okay? Just blame it on Lanny. Jesus, the light of the world. The Pharisees challenged him. here you are appearing as your own witness. Your testimony is not valid. Still referring to the law. Jesus said, even if I testify on my own behalf, my testimony is valid, for I know where I came from and where I'm going. But you have no idea where I came from or where I'm going. You judge me by human standards, but I do not judge anyone. That's a little bit of a strange statement. I do not judge anyone. He does judge, doesn't he? But I think that his message maybe is that at that particular time, he came as not a judge, but as a savior. He judged by word, but mostly he judged by his example. The example that he sets for us is the judgment against us when we refuse it. But of course, the time will come when he certainly will be judge, and every knee will bow. But it's just interesting that he said, I do not come to judge anyone. But if I do judge, my decisions are true because I'm not alone. I stand with the Father who sent me. Your own law says that if two people agree about something, their witness is accepted as fact. He's quoting now from Deuteronomy 17 and probably 2 or 3 other passages we could mention. So coming again to the multiple witnesses being required. So I am one witness, and my Father who sent me is the other. So there's your 2 witnesses. So my judgment when I judge is true. My testimony when I testify is true. So where is your Father, they ask. Who would they be thinking about? Joseph. Jesus answered, since you don't know who I am, you don't know who my Father is. If you knew me, you would also know my Father. And he wasn't talking about Joseph. Jesus made these statements while he was teaching in the section of the temple known as the treasury. But he was not arrested because his time had not yet come. So Jesus is not in some secluded place where people wouldn't have access to him. He's standing right there in the temple itself, on top of the Temple Mount. The treasury is the place where people brought their treasure and donated it, where their Corban came. And it's physically was located on the 2 sides of the Court of the Women. And the Court of the Women is right there in front of the place where you go into the temple area where sacrifices were made, and then into the holy place and into the Holy of Holies. That's a picture I took of the model in Jerusalem at the Jerusalem Museum. It occupies several hundred feet, and it's a scale model of the way Jerusalem looked back in Jesus' day. And it's just really very helpful in trying to visualize the first century Jerusalem that Jesus walked in. Later, Jesus said to them again, I am going away. You will search for me, but will die in your sin. You cannot come where I am going. The people ask, is he planning to commit suicide? What does he mean, you cannot come where I'm going? And Jesus continued, you are from below, I am from above. You belong to this world, but I do not. So there's something in the wording that Jesus uses here that the people who heard it took their mind to suicide. Isn't that interesting? They inferred from his language that he was talking about his own death at his own hand. We don't see that in our English translation, but obviously it was there because that was what they jumped to immediately. People don't know when they're going to die unless they plan to kill themselves. Jesus is saying, I'm going away, and you can't come. And so they infer from that if he knows when he's going to die, then he's going to do it himself. That is why I said that you will die in your sins, for unless you believe that I am who I claim to be, you will die in your sins. So he comes back to the I am statement, which of course is Remiz, and they would have understood it as Remiz. He's referring back to what? Back to the Moses event at the burning bush, when Moses says, God's telling Moses to go to Egypt and free his people, and Moses says, who shall I say sent me? And God says, I am that I am. Tell them, I am sent you. This is from Exodus 3. The word here that is used, the I am, is what's called a tetragrammaton, I'll say it right. And it's basically 4 consonants. It was in the Jewish custom, the Jewish history, it was too sacred to repeat. It was an unspoken name of God. They would use some other word in place of it. They would use Adonai or some other similar word describing God. Never would they use the Tetragrammaton. We use it now. We usually say it as Yahweh. The King James Version, when they translated, they chose the word Jehovah. So when you see Jehovah in the King James Version, it's a reference back to this consonant, which means I am. But it also means the name of God, which the Jew would not speak. The name was so held in awe by the religious Jews that as the scribes would make copies of the Torah and of the writings and the prophets, when they came to this word on the text, they would go and ceremonially wash and come back and use a new pen and quill and write that word every time it came up. So holy did they hold that name. I can't even think about this without remembering Michael Harbour, and y'all have heard me tell this story before. Michael was he's a wordsmith, and he likes studying words, and he absolutely hates the word Jehovah. He can tolerate Yahweh, but he cannot tolerate Jehovah. So we sing, "These are the days of Elijah," and sometimes we add on the little tagline, "There's no God like Jehovah, there's no God like Jehovah, there's no God like Jehovah, there's no God like Jehovah." Well, Michael would sing that, but he would sing it, "There's no word like Jehovah, there's no word like Jehovah." One of those things I can't get out of my mind. I wish I could. That's the I am. "Who are you?" they demanded. Jesus replied, "The one I have always claimed to be. I have much to say about you and much to condemn, but I won't. For I say only what I have heard from the one who sent me, and he is completely truthful." But they still didn't understand that he was talking about his heavenly Father. So Jesus said, "When you have lifted up the Son of Man on the cross, then you will understand." Or some translations say, "Then you will come to know that I am He." The lifted up is an interesting concept here too, because it has a double connotation. It's certainly the idea of physically raising something, as Jesus was physically raised on the cross. But it also has the idea, a connotation of lifting up as exalting something. I lift you up, I exalt you. And that was certainly not their intention, but Jesus says there is in that effect also. I do nothing of my own, but say only what the Father taught me, and the one who sent me is with me. He has not deserted me. Some translations say he has not left me alone, for I always do what pleases him. When you read, he has not deserted me, you can't help but think about what's coming ahead. When we see Jesus hanging on the cross and the 7 last utterances of Jesus as they're recorded for us include that famous Aramaic, Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani. My God, why have you forsaken me? We'll talk about that more when we eventually get to that place in the story, which hopefully most of us will still be alive by that time. But it's very poignant, and it's rife with deep meaning, and I don't pretend to begin to understand all of it. Just as a teaser, I would say that I do not believe that God ever forsook Jesus, not for a moment. I certainly believe that Jesus felt as though he were. He felt totally and completely deserted by God. But at this point in his life, as he's talking with these Jewish leaders, he said, my Father has not deserted me. He has not left me alone. He is with me all the time. He is continually at my side. And then many who heard him say these things believed in him. And I believe that our time is up. So we're going to leave off here, and we'll pick up here, Lord willing, next week. Thank you for your participation and attention, and have a wonderful God bless week.